The White House just released a new framework, the first comprehensive framework from the government on its recommendations for regulating cryptocurrencies and advancing the research and development of a CBDC, a central bank digital currency. You'll want to stick around through the end of this one. It has some scary recommendations. Ready? Let's dive in. Real quick word from today's sponsor, iTrustCapital. You guys know that I have used and recommended iTrustCapital for a very long time because you can invest in crypto using your IRA. And you can invest in gold and silver using your IRA. This means that whether you want to start up a new IRA and make new contributions to a traditional or a Roth, or whether you have money already in a retirement account that you want to roll over and use to buy gold, silver, or cryptocurrencies, you can do that safely, cheaply, and easily with iTrustCapital. And I'm serious when I say safely because they take security extremely seriously. They never take custody of your assets. They never borrow or lend against your assets. They never let their custody providers do either of those either. They also have an extremely straightforward pricing model. They do not have any monthly account fee. It's 1% for crypto, $50 for gold, and $250 for silver. Given the fact that cryptocurrency is in a severe bear market right now, many people are looking for ways to start buying the dip and getting in at the bottom here, but also people should be concerned about any tax implications that might come along with cryptocurrency gains later on should those assets be worth a lot more. Doing this within an IRA is the perfect way to shield yourself from those tax liabilities. If you do it with a Roth, any contributions that are made are taxed, which means any gains are not. In a traditional IRA, it is the exact opposite. And so IRAs are a fantastic strategy to avoid some of the tax implications you would have in a regular brokerage or a regular crypto account. And because they have assets like physical gold and physical silver available as well, this gives many people the option to invest in these alternative forms of money that normally you would not be able to do in a regular IRA or your 401k at work. So I'm a huge fan of iTrustCapital, using it for crypto, gold, or silver with your retirement money. And if you use my link in the description below, I've got a little bonus waiting for you as well. All right, so we are going to be going through a couple of the key things that you need to know about this framework that the White House just put out. I've got the PDF here. I've read the entire fact sheet. I've got it all marked up. We're going to go through the important points here. The first thing to note here is that none of this is law. About 6 months ago in March of 2022, Biden signed an executive order saying, hey, we need to start looking into these things. And then this is the report they just published on, hey, here's the things that we need to do, but there's no law here. This is all just policy recommendations, but it's really important to know what's in here because this is what the government is going to be doing moving forward in this direction, whether it's the regulatory agencies like the SEC or the CFTC, or whether it's Congress or the Fed or the Treasury. This is the framework that the government will likely be using to move forward on new laws, new restrictions, new research, new funding, all of that. So this is key to understand because it points the direction that our country will probably be going in the future for these things. The first thing we need to look at here is it's talking about the size of the cryptocurrency market from $3 trillion last November. It is no longer that big. Obviously, last November 2021, market caps of every cryptocurrency were at their all-time highs, basically. And so they're saying that they also pose real risk from these recent crashes. Like in May, there was the stablecoin Terra Luna that crashed. Wave of insolvencies wiped out investor funds. So they're saying because of these things, there's some good, there's some bad. We need to try and stop the bad, and we need to try to make the good happen more. And as with everything the government touches, the result will probably be the exact opposite. But let's move forward here. March 9th executive order. This was the EO that I mentioned earlier where he signed the executive order to start talking about these things. And now this is the report that's being published about policy recommendations there, as you can see here. And there are 6 areas we're going to look at throughout throughout this report. Consumer investor protection, promoting financial stability, countering illicit finance, U.S. leadership in the global financial system and economic competitiveness, financial inclusion, responsible innovation. Those are going to be the categories we're going to look through here. And as you can see, there are going to be a lot of areas to hide some really dangerous policy. Let's move on. So regarding protecting consumers, investors, and businesses, we see here that the current global market cap is approximately 1/3 of its peak from November of 2021. In addition to that, we've seen non-compliance with the current laws and regulations that remains widespread. They've found many disclosure transparency problems, false promises of guaranteed returns, lots of fraud, scams, and theft. And in 2021, there were reported monetary losses of about 600% higher than they were the year before. So they're pointing out there's a lot of problems here with people losing money, getting scammed, fraudulent schemes going on here. And I'd like to point out that this is what free markets handle best. So already we see that the cryptocurrency market market cap is about 1/3 of its size as it was just about 1 year ago. Why is that? Because a lot of investors were putting money into things that were scams, that were fraud, that have no utility, that their real true value is zero, and it has just yet to come to fruition for that price to actually hit zero. This is what free markets handle best. They let failure fail, and they cause the people who invest in that failure to lose their money, the people to invest in those scams to lose their money. That's an incentive then. It teaches that person, now I have to be more careful about what I put my money in next time so I don't lose it. And if that person's not smart enough to learn their lesson, guess what happens to them? They lose all their money and they can no longer destroy resources because they've used up all their resources and it's been destroyed. So they're not allocated any additional capital to then go out and destroy. This is how capitalism works. This is how free markets work. That if you allocate capital correctly, you get a return, and now you have more capital to allocate correctly and therefore benefit society that way by creating more wealth. Alternatively, if you're bad at allocating capital, you lose all that capital and you don't have the ability to continue to destroy wealth because you destroy all of your wealth, get no extra. This is what capitalism does, and this is a feature, not a bug. And so coming in here and trying to create new laws, new regulations to prevent things like this from happening is the exact opposite. Yes, it's a wild west. Yes, people lose money. The market will mature on its own. People will realize what to do, what not to do, what to go for, what not to go for. And the people who don't learn their lessons will lose all their money and they won't be able to lose any more money because they'll be out of all their money. So that's the point. And so by coming in here and trying to impose laws, you're only going to cause secondary effects, second order effects that are going to probably be worse than just the initial loss of funds. All right, regarding access to financial services, the report finds that there are 7 million Americans with no bank account, and then another 24 million rely on non-bank services like check cashing and money orders for everyday needs. So it's astonishing to me that these businesses still exist and are thriving in poor communities. Basically, the way you know you're in a good area or a bad area is how many of those check cashing places you see on the corners, because the non-banked people are typically the poor people, and what they do is they take their checks and they'll go cash them, and they're going to take a huge haircut on that. They're giving up 10%, 15%, whatever it is, in order to get the cash immediately from their paycheck there. And this is how they operate. They don't have bank accounts and then they use cash for everything. And so they're saying that, hey, we need to get all these Americans into using banking services into the 21st century. So part of that is potentially some benevolence there, wanting to help people out with access to things that are not predatory in nature. But on the other hand, when people operate in all cash, those transactions are all under the table. So there's a huge percentage of the population that operates in all cash, doesn't pay taxes on any of their stuff because they don't have to. Nothing's reported. It's not seen. There's no tracking ability for any cash transactions. And so this is the insidious side of the coin, is that the government wants to make sure that they're taxing and getting their cut from all of the poor people's transactions that they're not getting a cut of right now. Next, Federal Reserve has planned the 2023 2023 launch of FedNow. I made a video about this previously. You can find it on my page. It was within the last couple of weeks, but the Federal Reserve is launching the infrastructure next July, 2023 July, the infrastructure for their CBDC. It won't be a CBDC yet, but this is the rails that the CBDC will be built on. It's an instantaneous 24/7 interbank clearing system. It will further advance nationwide infrastructure for instant payments alongside the real-time payment system. And so this is the rails for the future CBDC. And we can see here that they are saying, hey, this is a good thing that we are moving into the 21st century with our digital dollar system. Now, here is a big, huge, fat warning sign that should scare the pants off of anybody who's reading this. To promote safe and affordable financial services for all. That's the reasoning for this next section. Agencies will encourage the adoption of instant payment systems like FedNow. They're going to be using these instant payment systems for their own transactions. So this is any government agencies that they can get on board with this will be put on to FedNow and some of these other precursors to a central bank digital currency. They'll be using these for their own internal payments, payments to contractors, and here's the key. For example, just hypothetically, if this were to ever to happen, in the context of distribution of disaster, emergency, or other government to consumer payments. So I've said this plenty of times before. The next crash, or the crash that's unfolding right now, is going to get so severe that the American people will be crying for a bailout. There will be depression level destruction of wealth. There will be market crashes to incredibly steep beyond where we're at right now. We're going to have joblessness, unemployment. People are going to be crying for the government to save them. And here's the key. This is what it says here. Distribution of disaster or emergency or other government to consumer payments. So this is where they're going to launch, again, a precursor to a CBDC. They're going to say, hey, we need to get you guys payments. The IRS can't handle it. We can't just do direct deposit to your bank accounts like we did last time because you spent it on stuff we didn't want you to spend it on because some people didn't get it because some people were waiting for checks in mail. Some people don't have bank accounts. So instead, we're going to do an app. We're going to do a CBDC. You're going to download this app. You get your money right away. You can spend it at any business that also downloads that app. So it's going to be easy peasy. They're going to use this during the next crash, during the depths, the pits of the next crash, when things are most painful, to get people to sign on to the CBDC. And it's going to be, again, in this example of a disaster or an emergency. Probably won't be a war thing, probably won't be a climate thing, probably won't be a disaster like a hurricane thing. I think it'll be an economic thing. It'll be like a March of 2020 thing. That was the trial run with those stimmy checks. They're going to launch universal basic income through a CBDC within the next year and a half, 2 years with this new system. Moving on, the president will consider an agency to regulate non-bank payment providers. And so you send Bitcoin to somebody, that's technically could be included in a non-bank payment provider, and they're going to want to try and regulate that somehow. Specifically with Bitcoin, it's going to be so difficult that it might not actually be possible, but with everything else, the surface areas of attack, they're centralized enough, they can regulate those things. Next, they're trying to align global payment practices while exploring new multilateral platforms. This is referring to something I made a video about this as well within the last couple of months. The new SWIFT, the SWIFT system right now, they're trying to work with other countries that are developing their own CBDCs right now. They're trying to use SWIFT to launch a separate infrastructure alongside SWIFT so that SWIFT can still be used as the cross-border payment system between different countries, because if every country has their own CBDC, cross-border payments will be difficult. So the United States still wants SWIFT so that they still get that control. So they're trying to develop a system alongside of SWIFT that can be the intermediary language between different countries' CBDCs. Again, it's all about maintaining control here so that they can maintain control of the global financial system. And that's what this is, making sure that they have the ability to use multilateral platforms here, aligning global payment practices so that they can be the in-between between every country for sanctions and things like that. All right, fostering financial stability. We've got channels for turmoil, spillover effects from stable coins, the crash of the so-called stablecoin Terra USD, wave of insolvencies erased nearly $600 billion in wealth. So the first thing I would like to ask is, what risk did this pose to the global financial system? A big fat zero. No risk. When Bitcoin crashed from $65,000 down to $19,000, what risk did that pose to the entire global financial system? Zero. When China outlawed Bitcoin mining, mining. What risk did that pose to the global financial system? None. What risk did that pose to the Bitcoin system? None. Zero. Nothing happened. So with all of these things, and we're pointing to stablecoins crashing, other cryptocurrencies, the NFT market crashing, Bitcoin going down, all of these things, what risk do these pose to the broader global financial system? Absolutely none. The only risk is that the people who put their money in will lose their money. We've already talked about how that's a feature, not a bug, because it compels people to be more careful in the future about where they allocate their capital. Correct decisions get rewarded with more capital to allocate more correctly later, and incorrect decisions erase your capital so you don't have the ability to make that mistake again and destroy more of society's resources. So when we talk about the channels for turmoil and spillover effects and stable coins, there's no risks to the global financial system. Now, compare this to the risk of the repo market blowing up in September of 2019. Compare this to the risk of the hedge fund long-term capital management failing in 1998. Compare this to the risk of the housing market and subprime mortgages and collateralized loan obligations all blowing up to the global financial system. Those all have real risks. What's the difference? One is a free market, one is heavily regulated and controlled by governments all around the world. Which one poses the risk to the global financial system? The heavily regulated one and controlled by the governments, not the free market one. Free markets got this covered. When people make bad decisions, they lose their money. When people make good decisions, they don't lose their money. That's the end of it. Government gets involved, everything is at risk of collapsing altogether. Which one do you want? Because I know which one I want. Let's move on. This is a big one here. The Department of Energy, the Environmental Protection Agency, and other agencies will consider further tracking digital assets. Environmental impacts. They're going to develop performance standards, provide local authorities with the tools, resources, and expertise necessary to mitigate environmental harms, with the goal of transitioning to a net zero emissions economy and improving environmental justice. Environmental justice, that's a funny one. Personally, I haven't heard that term yet. I'm thankful because it pisses me off. What is justice? Justice means an evil was done, a moral non-good was done. Therefore, we improve upon that, we correct that, we justify the situation, we rectify it, and the person who did the bad thing gets something bad done to them. There's punishment. And the person, the victim who got something bad done to them, gets some sort of retribution, some sort of justice, some sort of recovery from the bad thing that was done to them so that they can be made whole again. There is no such thing as environmental justice. The environment is not a moral issue. It can do no wrong. It can do no right. Similarly, the relationship between people and the environment is not a moral one. We cannot make an evil act against nature. We can only do net neutral, morally speaking, acts against nature. If I chop down a tree, that's not evil. It's just a tree that got chopped down. Maybe there are certain actions you can say that are better or worse in terms of their effectiveness at accomplishing a certain goal, but there's no morality there. If I dig a hole in the earth, that's not immoral. You might say that's a bad way to build a staircase is to dig a hole, and a more effective way would be to pile dirt on top of each other, but you can't say it's immoral. Therefore, there's no such thing as justice when it comes to the environment. Only when it's between individuals, people, humans. Why am I going on about this? Because it's a big deal, because criminal actions and crimes and enforcing punishments of crimes should be constrained to morality, to issues of good and bad, of evil, to restrain evil as much as possible. And when you branch out into trying to legislate moral actions on things that have no morals, then you can say anything is evil. You can say you committed a sin against the earth and therefore you get the death penalty. There's justice that needs to be served to the earth. So since you caused a part of the earth to die, then we should cause you to die. Just like if you murdered a person, you can murder a rock. That's nonsense, but that's what's baked into the cake here. Hopefully we never get there, but that's what's being baked into the cake when they start using words like environmental justice. It's nonsense and it's dangerous. Moving on. U.S. agencies will leverage U.S. positions in international organizations to message US values related to digital assets. So again, this goes back to trying to maintain the position of power the US has over the global financial system, payment system. They want to make sure that they have control there. So they're going to leverage their US positions in international organizations. Now, in terms of fighting illicit finance, this is things like fighting financial crimes of like paying for crimes. They're saying that there are some digital assets that are pseudonymous. We're going to come back to that because that's very important here. Pseudonymous, and they can be transferred without a financial intermediary. That's also important. These have been exploited by bad actors to launder illicit proceeds, to finance terrorism, the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, and to conduct a wide variety of other crimes, such as ransomware, narcotic sales, money laundering for drug trafficking, and the funding of activities of rogue regimes. So it's pretty clear which one they're trying to talk about here without talking about it, and it's Bitcoin, right? That is the prevailing narrative by anybody in government who doesn't like Bitcoin, which is pretty much the entire government, and they say that it's used for all sorts of bad things. Okay. Let's go back to that first word I circled, pseudonymous. There are three words here, three classifications. There's fully transparent, which is like a bank account. You can't open up a bank account without all of your entire life's history being known by the bank. Your social security number, your date of birth, your wealth, your income, your expenses, your tax history, like literally everything. They know everything about you to have a bank account there. Fully transparent. On the other side, you have anonymous. This would be something like physical paper cash, like US dollar bills. These you pay. There is no record. There is no transaction history. It is fully anonymous. That transaction takes place with no record of who is transacting, what is being transacted for, like what's being purchased or sold, and there's no history, no memory associated with it. Something like Bitcoin is pseudonymous. So instead of accounts with your name and financial history and social security number and all that, there's what's called a wallet. It's just an account number, and it's just a random string of digits and numbers. And it's pseudonymous because, yes, you control that wallet, but your name is not associated with it in any way. Your financial history, nothing. You could have 100 different wallets, and none of them anybody would know are owned or controlled by the same person. The problem is it's not anonymous, which means with the right amount of information and the right power, you can find out who controls those wallets. So if I know how to track down your internet service provider and figure out your IP addresses of your device, and I know what wallets you use, whether it's Coinbase or something like that, I can go back as the FBI, as the CIA, as any law enforcement agency with the resources that I need, and I can find out who controls any Bitcoin wallet. And criminals know this now. So Bitcoin's not used for any crime anymore because everybody knows that if the government wants to, they can find out who controls those wallets, and they can find out who made those transactions happen. And the nature of the blockchain is that every transaction is recorded all the way back to the first one. So as soon as they find out one, they can just trace it all the way back and find out everywhere it came from. So it's pretty easy. It's pseudonymous. So the average person's not ever going to be able to tell or know how to find it out. But if somebody has the resources to, they can find out who sent Bitcoin and who controls it for any wallet. And so the fact that they're mentioning all of these things, all these crimes that are funded with Bitcoin, that's complete nonsense and not true. Nobody uses Bitcoin for crimes anymore, especially the big ones, because it's trackable. They can find it out. Cash, on the other hand, government money, you can't track it. Bank accounts, obviously, they'll stop it, they'll pull it back, all that. But Bitcoin pseudonymous, this is just a complete misnomer here. It is just not true. All right, now let's move on to exploring a CBDC, because this is the big stuff. This is the scary stuff. As you know, I've made plenty of videos about this. This is the line in the sand that we cannot cross no matter what. Don't sign up for a CBDC because there's no coming back after crossing that line. So they label all the benefits here that a CBDC could have. More efficient, cross-border transactions that are faster, environmentally sustainable, promoting financial inclusion, economic growth and stability, protect against cyber and operational risks, safeguard privacy of sensitive data, minimize the risk of illicit financial transactions, preserve global financial leadership, support the effectiveness of sanctions. So for the United States government, all of these are benefits, but that's key for the United States government. So we're going to go through these one by one and look at how they're not actually something that individuals should want. So enable a payment system that is more efficient. You don't necessarily want an efficient payment system because that decreases security. The more secure something is, the less efficient it is. And so for your big payments, you want to make sure that they're more secure. You don't necessarily care that they happen instantaneously. Now, compared to dollar transactions that take sometimes months to settle, this would be a big benefit. But for the most part, individuals don't need this because most individual transactions are happening on second, third, fourth layer compared to the bottom money transaction layer. And so for practical purposes, they already settle instantly. Facilitating faster cross-border transactions here. This one is like, yeah, international wires. Yeah, we need to fix this. Using something like Bitcoin, the Lightning Network, this fixes this already. But when you talk about sending dollar payments, cross-border transactions, yeah, we definitely need this to be better. Environmentally sustainable. This is one that I've talked about already here, but one more note about this is that incentives and direction matter more than current location. And so when you look at the incentives and the direction of something like Bitcoin mining, yes, takes a lot of energy, but the incentive is to find the cheapest energy possible, because the cheaper the energy you can find, the more money you make, the more profit you have from mining Bitcoin. That's just the difference between the two is your profit. And so the incentive built into Bitcoin mining is to find the cheapest energy. So that's going to push it towards the most renewable, the most abundant supply. That's why solar panels, putting energy from places where you can't access it to the grid, like volcanoes and hydroelectric and the steam powered and natural gas that's just being flared off into the atmosphere. All of these types of energy that are either wasted, not being used. Bitcoin, the incentive is to go start using those because it's profitable. And because of the money then associated with that, it increases the production and the advancement and the investment in and the research for all of these alternative sources of energy that are cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and more abundant. This is a sustainable future. So the incentives and the direction matter far more than current location. Further, all of the worst things that contribute to the environment are done by the government, and we don't have time to go into this, but the government and fiat money is the source behind everything that's bad for the environment. And so when we talk about a payment system that is more efficient or more environmentally sustainable, that's not going to matter, because what that money is used for, funding the government, and what it subsidizes is wrecking the environment by itself. And so the payment system here is not the problem. It's the government and unlimited financing that the government has through fiat. All right. Next, a couple other things that they're saying are good. They're going to economic growth and stability. Economic growth and stability here, that's them saying, hey, if we have a CBDC, we'll have control over things like stopping people from shorting stocks or shorting something if it's dropping really quickly. They can do that with a CBDC. They can't really do that right now. If they want to say we want to stop bubbles from forming in the stock market, temporarily we'll freeze all accounts from being able to transfer into brokerage accounts. So they can do things like this because you have 100% complete control over the money with a central bank digital currency that you don't have with the current financial system. Other things like privacy of sensitive data, not really private, I mean private from the rest of the world, but you still would have one entity, the Federal Reserve, with access to every single person's financial history, transaction data, being able to stop and start transactions, credit people's accounts, debit people's accounts. It's pure tyranny over the monetary system. And finally, the U.S. global financial leadership is intended to support the effectiveness of sanctions. And so that's the big one here with the US CBDC. We want to be able to have still control over the global financial system to make sure that we can impose our will over the rest of the world. And so that's going to be one of the key drivers of how they develop a CBDC, is making sure they maintain global power here with the monetary system. And then finally, if you stuck around for this one, this is the biggest one here. This is the most dangerous one, and this is the one I'm most scared about. So the recommendation is, first of all, they're encouraging the Federal Reserve to continue its ongoing research, but they're also, this is huge, they are going to create a treasury. The treasury will lead an interagency working group. So they're going to create an interagency working group between the treasury and the Federal Reserve here, an interagency working group between the Federal Reserve and the treasury to consider the potential implications of the US CBDC, leverage cross-border technical expertise, and all that. So this is the big one. This is the big one I told you to hang on through the rest of the video for. If you're still here, congratulations. This is a long one. The Treasury and the Federal Reserve have been moving closer and closer and closer over the past decade or so. In the fall of the financial crisis, before that, they were pretty much separate. In order to deal with the financial crisis, they came together and they said, hey, we need to work together here to bail out the financial system. And so they did things like the Federal Reserve monetized the U.S. government debt for the first time. They printed a bunch of money, bought U.S. government debt. That's the Treasury working in coordination with the Federal Reserve. Another way of saying this, Ray Dalio talks about this a lot, monetary policy merging with fiscal policy, because fiscal policy is the federal government through the Treasury. Monetary policy is the Federal Reserve, its interest rates and quantitative easing, quantitative tightening. So the more you merge those two together, the more control you have over an economy and a financial system. They're supposed to be separate. That was why it was set up that way legally from the beginning, so that the government didn't have all this power. They were supposed to be kept separate, but they've been merging, especially over the last decade, tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter. This was even further advanced in 2020 when the Federal Reserve looked at the markets and they said, we need to buy corporate bonds. But guess what? The Federal Reserve Act prohibits the Federal Reserve from buying things like corporate bonds directly onto their balance sheet. So what did they do? The Treasury instead opened up these things called special purpose vehicles. The Federal Reserve printed cash, gave it to the Treasury. The Treasury used that cash to buy those things instead. This is like you going to the liquor store when you're 18 years old. You've got a cousin who's 21. You send your cousin in and say, buy me some alcohol. Here's my money. You're not legally able to do it, but you give him the money to go do it for you. It's the same result. You get your alcohol. So the Federal Reserve violated the Federal Reserve Act by funding the special purpose vehicles at the Treasury to buy things like high yield corporate debt. Not supposed to be allowed, but they did it anyway. Merging of monetary and fiscal policy. This is the next step. And this is why I've said a launch of a CBDC will probably involve a complete merging of the Fed and the Treasury, because you have to. And this is the first step with that. You've got to take the Treasury and the Federal Reserve and merge them far more than they are right now, basically to be under one roof, and this is the start of that. They are launching an interagency group between the Fed and the Treasury to research and further develop the future of the US CBDC. This is the start of merging the Fed and the Treasury, merging monetary and fiscal policy. And when that happens, basically everything changes. At that point, we enter into a new system, there's a phase change that takes place with the economy, because the government then has full control over unlimited funding, unlimited spending power. You enter full-blown modern monetary theory, where it's not debt anymore that they're issuing. They're printing money directly to finance all of their expenses. That's what this would be. So that's what you need to know about the White House's new report recommendations, policy recommendations for cryptocurrency and CBDC. Hopefully you're able to stick around with me through the end here. And if you did, thank you so much for watching. As always, have a great day.